And so then I'm like, okay, so I'm starting to put all this stuff together. I'm like, what's this Tartarian stuff? What's this Atlantis stuff? I know Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media went to Mauritania. He said that's pretty much definitely it. I never even looked into it because, I'm like, well, I'm busy. But then I start reading your book, and I'm like, whoa, this is incredible information. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. You've got tons of footnotes in it. So it's not like you made any or all of it or any of it up, as far as I can tell. It looks like you've taken most of it from stuff that you've gotten from like Plato and Hermes and all kinds of books that people don't even know about. And then I'm looking, and they're talking about all this alien stuff now. And as I'm reading this, you're talking about how the Atlanteans could space travel, and they're probably coming back in a couple of years. And we were talking offline, and you're like, yeah, and they're probably going to fake an alien invasion, or say it's fake, but it might even be the Atlanteans, some of it. We'll get into this. There's lots to talk about, don't worry. You haven't even started yet. And the Nephilim, all this stuff, it's all like fitting into like spots for my brain, like, yeah. And, I'm like, well, what is space? And the moon landing was obviously fake. They're trying to hide all that stuff. And then you get into the whole flat earth stuff, and that's very interesting. And you've got so much in this book. Like, where do we even begin? Like, why don't you lead off and just say what basically the book's about?
Well, first, it's not my book.
Right.
You're the publisher? I just published it. I was approached by someone with a very interesting history, we'll say, who brought me this manuscript and said he wanted me to take this to the public because he would not be able to do it himself. And because, my job is creating companies, managing companies, running companies, setting things up, auditing companies, so it was no sweat for me to get the publishing account set up, get it designed, get it printed, and get it in Amazon. And it's in pretty much every bookstore in the planet now. If they don't have it in stock, as long as they have an account with Ingram Spark, they would be able to order it. And it's also always on Amazon, so the global Amazon distribution is sending this anywhere as well.
Oh, and you're also going to be bringing like 30 copies to Acapulco, just so you know. So if you do read it and you're like, wow, it'd be cool to get like a autographed copy from the publisher, you're going to be there with the book.
Yeah.
But let's get into the book.
And so he, the Yajnavalkya, we'll say for lack of his actual name.
Where does that word name come from?
It's from a prophecy. In the Hindu scriptures, there's a sage named Yajnavalkya, and he wrote 2 of the principal Upanishads, which is all about, the mind and consciousness and meditating, and how to live a virtuous and happy, joyful life.
I've read 1 or 2 of the Upanishads. I don't even remember what the names are, and it was amazing. Like I try to read a lot of these things. Most of it doesn't resonate at all with me, but the Upanishads really did. And I think you did tell me, and your wife is Hindu, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So you did mention that, and I was like, oh, that's another thing. Kind of like I'm just starting to everything's sort of fitting in here. So yeah.
But so there's a prophecy, and I know you know about the Yuga cycle.
Yes.
Because you're always talking about being in Kali Yuga, and the prophecy is in. What is it? I think it's the either the Vishnu Purana or the Matsya Purana. I can't remember which one it is. But those are the only 2 that talk about the end of Kali Yuga. And it's in one of them it says that just prior to the arrival of Kalki, who is the 10th avatar of Vishnu, Yajnavalkya will make his appearance. And so I think that's what he is alluding to, because it is something that also comes up in the book, is this cycle of ages, because the first part of the book is called the Ages of Man, and he decodes what is the Golden Age and exactly when was that and who lived in it and what were they doing, and then the Silver Age and the Bronze Age and the current Iron Age and when that began, because the Yajnavalkya is not he's not writing anything new per se. This isn't like a lot of literature that deals with Atlanteans or ancient aliens or anything like that, where they do channeling or they make a lot of huge leaps. There's hundreds of footnotes to mainstream publications. And so the way I like to describe it to people is like that scene in V for Vendetta where the two police officers meet some guy at this old monument to a bunch of kids that died from this fake virus that they released. And they think they're meeting a police whistleblower or a government whistleblower. It's actually V in disguise. And the police is like, okay, so what are you going to give us? And he says to them, well, you already have everything. The facts and figures and data and everything you need is inside your head. What you need is the story that brings it all together and that joins one dot to the next and paints a picture that makes sense. And as fantastical a tale as this is, it makes complete sense. And so after reading that manuscript, of course I had to take this thing to print.
Yeah, as I was reading it, like, that's why I had to have you on to talk about it, is it makes so much sense as it's all laid out, as all the dots are connected. And you know, I haven't really looked into, like, what are the Anunnaki, what are the Nephilim, was Atlantis even real? But, well, why don't you start with kind of where it starts, with what this is about?
Yeah. Well, the world at large, and, you know, the average person, we find ourselves sort of in the middle of a 15,000-year-old grudge match between two factions or two kingdoms of what was Atlantis. And yes, Atlantis was real. It's a real place. You know, they found the capital city in Mauritania about 70 years ago, but of course, you never heard that. Nobody decided to announce it. It's undeniably the capital city, not only because of the structure, the rings within rings, central island, 2 land rings, 3 water rings, access out to the sea. We know that this structure in Mauritania was accessible because there was a river that flowed right past it, straight out to the Atlantic Ocean. But Plato says, very matter-of-factly, that this was part of the Atlantean kingdom. If you read Plato very carefully, he does not say it's one island out in front of the Strait of Gibraltar. He says that was an island they were using to mount an assault on people within the Mediterranean. But he says that all of Atlantis included that island and all of the other islands, which is a reference to Macaronesia. So we've got the Canary Islands and we've also got Cape Verde. But then he also says it included parts of the mainland, which is North Africa. And he also says it includes part of Southwest Europe. So Spain and Italy. He says it went all the way to Etruria, which is North Italy, where the Etruscans are from. That's where the name is from. So Plato gives us this huge, vast kingdom of which we find the reshot structure within. Now, the other big, there's a very big, I guess, bomb that's dropped in this story. And I'm sure most people who read into Atlantis have heard people in academia say this before, even people in the researcher community, that Plato is the only source for the story of Atlantis. That is a lie. And it's been a lie for at least 1,000 years, because for 1,000 years we've had manuscripts of Book 3 of Diodorus Siculus's Library of History. And in Book 3 of the Library of History, he has an account from a guy named Dionysius Schidobrachion, who he says is a guy from Alexandria. Now, this guy has chapters upon chapters upon chapters about Atlantis. And so the first English translations of this were available well over 100 years ago. It's been in the hands of academia, and they know this exists, and yet they still say that Plato's the only source. And I've actually gone at an academic about this very issue, and first of all, he tries to just brush it aside. Oh, no, it's not there. And then I said, here's a link to it. You can read it yourself. Oh, well, Diodorus wrote it and he came after Plato. And then, well, no, it wasn't, because he says it came from this other guy, Dionysius Scytobrachion. And then he says, okay, well, oh, you mean Dionysius of Miletus. Miletus is a city in Turkey, not Alexandria, Egypt. So they're probably not the same guy. But even if they were, Dionysius of Miletus died decades before Plato was born. So these are not one account dependent upon the other account. They're entirely different accounts from different people telling different parts of the story of the Atlanteans, whereas Plato focuses in on the city and the structure of the government and the rights of succession to the throne. Diodorus talks a lot about family squabbles and the genealogy of the family, which, by the way, is completely different from the very short genealogy that Plato gives us. Plato says Atlantis was ruled by, or you had Poseidon, the god, and Cleito, a mortal woman from, wherever he places Atlantis, Mauritania. They get together and have 5 sets of identical twins, which, it's possible, I suppose, but it's pretty improbable. This seems more like some sort of allegorical story. Diodorus' story, completely different, much more believable. He doesn't invoke any gods, and the names of people are different except for one name. The most important one, obviously, is Atlas, because Atlas is not the founder, but he was the first king after the founder. And he was the one who, I guess, mastered the art of celestial navigation and made Atlantis into the seafaring power that it was. And so, of course, that's why he's remembered, and everything is named after him. Mount Atlas, Atlantis, Atlanteans, the Atlantic Ocean. So, as kings do, he's just stamping his name all over the world, going, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, I guess. So that's a very big revelation, I guess, in a book that is just packed full of other revelations about what has gone on and what has been hidden away from us as part of our history, because this book goes back, it goes back to the very beginning, 300,000 years ago. It's the earliest fossils we have, well, they're not fossils, but bones of what we think is Homo sapien. But the real story begins about 24,000 years ago, which was when a particular genetic a Y chromosome haplogroup, which is just a mutation on the Y chromosome. It doesn't do anything, but it just allows you to track, one son, the paternal line. So if you're a member of this haplogroup, you can trace your lineage back to King Atlas or Poseidon. And so this haplogroup emerges 24,000 years ago in Mauritania, which also happens to be around the beginning of the last golden age, the last age of Aquarius. And so the Atlantean story, I guess it's great in the sense, I suppose, that they're the only advanced civilization on the planet. Everyone else is hunter-gatherers. Everywhere they go on planet Earth, all they run into are other hunter-gatherer tribes who, by their nature, are very superstitious. And when they encounter people with seemingly magical-like abilities, to do the things that they do, they start worshiping them as gods. And this is the beginning of religion in the world. And it's not something that they ever wanted for themselves. It just kind of happened. And it still kind of just happens, because if you go down to the islands in the South Pacific, there are actual tribes of people who had their first contact with Western civilization during World War II. The United States was using those islands as essentially aircraft carriers to go and bomb Japan with. And so they see these white people walking around in strange clothes, doing strange things on their parade decks, and, you know, these flying beasts in the sky making all these noises, and these deadly weapons that fire thunder. And, you know, they're like, these are the gods. They're gods. And sure enough, years later, you have the anthropologists going back to these islands, and these tribesmen are now building wooden makeshift airplanes and dressing like American GIs from the 1940s and marching around on parade decks, having no idea what it is that they're doing, but they're sure that by marching around on a parade deck and doing these drills, that they're going to bring the cargo. That the cargo, the beast from the sky is going to come and drop the cargo with all the goodies inside. And then we get to be like the gods, because now we're going to get the goodies. And they're cults, so they call them cargo cults. And they actually even have a name for their deity. They call him John Frum, of all things. So could you imagine, you know, that? If that is real and is happening now, it could happen at any point in human history.
So you're saying, what did you say, 15,000 years ago? 20?
Yeah, about 15,000 years ago is when the story starts getting interesting.
So they're in Atlantis, and they're really advanced. Like, when you say celestial navigation, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like spaceships?
No, I mean using the sun and the stars to tell where you are on the planet. Okay,
so they were very smart. They'd figured out a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, you know, it was kind of an obsession for them, because their whole religion back then, or not really religion, I would say their funeral rites were based around this. Because if you were somebody who was well known or important, when you died, what they would do is they would name a star after you. And this is where the whole idea of people being translated to heaven comes from. And this is one of the things that Diodorus explains in his book. Their whole like astronomy and religion to them and science was all the same thing. They worshipped at the altar of the universe, and they believed in a sense that God was everything, was all things. You, me, the rocks, the trees, the earth we're on, the space between the planets, the stars. It was all God in one sense or another. It is all part of His creation, and
I agree with that.
And only a small part of the creation, because there are dimensions higher than this physical plane that they learned to manipulate, which is why their technology, even to somebody today, would appear magical and absolutely
like at some point
shocking.
They made spaceships and left, right?
Yeah, they had to. They had to.
So how, like, we don't want to get too deep into all that, and definitely get the book to read about all that stuff, but get to the part about like the Nephilim and why they left and stuff like that.
So I talked about some factions, and so if you read Plato and you read Diodorus, they both say that the Atlantis was not it was more of a confederation of separate Atlantean states, sort of like the United States of Atlantis in a way, where they all had their own king, but they all answered to the one true king, the King of Kings, who was Atlas. And, you know, they had all of these rules about what they were able to do or not. And one of the rules was, you know, if you broke the rules, all of the other kings of Atlantis were obliged to attack you and get rid of you. And so we have this one king In Plato, he's called Gadirus, and he ruled the northern parts, like Morocco and southern Spain, is where Plato says he was based. And Diodorus also says the same thing. But Diodorus doesn't call him the same name as Plato. He calls him Cronus. And anybody who's read the Greek myths knows who Cronus is. Cronus is the child devourer. He's the cannibal. He's the one who wants to consume human flesh. King Atlas no likey. And so there was a civil war. And that went down in legends as the war in heaven. Angels against angels, battling it out. And eventually, Cronus loses. He's tossed in Tartarus and imprisoned. But what do you do with his army? You can't execute them all. And Atlanteans, by all accounts, are pretty peace-loving people. They don't go slaughtering people like Cronus was doing. So what do? Well, they exile them. And where do they go? Mesopotamia. Because the Atlanteans, or King Atlas, had already begun building a relationship with the people in Mesopotamia. And this is where the whole story of Adam and Eve goes. They took somebody from Mesopotamia and brought them to the royal garden at the center of Atlantis to be there with the king, just for him to kind of see, can these people, who by all accounts are exactly the same as us, can they become more than this, what they are? And sure enough, it seemed like it could be the case. And so that's really why Adam was returned, because it's like, okay, well, you can do this, Adam. So it's time for you to go and do it. You can't just be here eating everything in my garden. This is my stuff too. I got to eat too. And so they send him back. And of course, Cronus's army is, every bit like Cronus himself. Many of them were related to him, which is also what the genetic story tells us, because you have a group of men, all from the exact same Y haplogroup, which is a subset of the founder of Atlantis, leave Africa and wind up in the Middle East around 14,200 years ago, which, if you work out the dating of everything, and the book shows it to you, that is exactly when the Book of Enoch says the Watchers showed up. He says between when I am writing this story right now, he says there's going to be 70 generations between now and the arrival of the Son of Man, which is a comet which destroyed the world in every bit. In every way that is described, the world is going to be destroyed in the Book of Enoch. He says, fire is going to come down from heaven, and there's going to be floods and a cataclysm that will kill everything and everyone. And this is, what we're condemning them to experience. So they wind up here, and this is the story of the arrival of the Anunnaki, which is how the Sumerians retell it. And the Sumerians are just one of a whole chain of societies that have existed in Mesopotamia. There's been Sumerians, Assyrians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and more we don't even have names for yet, because the story actually goes back many thousands of years before there were Sumerians. But we just don't know enough about that area. We haven't done enough digging to find everything. But so these Atlanteans, they wind up in the Middle East, and they're sentenced to leave and live out the rest of your days and die. But it says in the Book of Enoch that they all got together, swore an oath, and broke the terms of their parole by taking wives and having children, which are the Nephilim. That got them all immediately arrested and thrown into Tartarus, along with Cronus. Except for one guy, his name was Azazel. Azazel was the one who taught warfare and weaponry to humans. So he got a special punishment. He was buried alive, according to the Book of Enoch. Interestingly enough, though, if you read the Testament of Solomon, there's a demon that he summons called Beelzebub, and Beelzebub tells him, I am one of the watchers. And the only one who would be left at that point was Azazel, so maybe Azazel is Beelzebub. You have a lot of these same people showing up under different names across different cultural stories. But, you know, you have all these stories very much like you see the same flood myths showing up in culture after culture after culture after culture. You have very similar characters showing up in the Hebrew stories, in the Egyptian stories, and in the Mesopotamian stories. Those civilizations are all very close together. They're probably all describing the same people, just under different names. They've changed the names because we're talking about things that happened over 10,000 years ago. So when you're telling these stories and you're talking about these people in these places that don't exist anymore and names that just sound weird and foreign, you don't want that. So the storytellers will update the names of places to make the stories, you know, feel more relevant to the people they're being told to. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we should just consider the entire thing a myth. These are not myths the way, you know, a modern day scholar would describe it. If this was, you know, just some story that some dude made up, it wouldn't be sacred. It wouldn't be held with the amount of reverence it is. There has to be an element of truth to it. And that's always goes back to, where did we come from? And so that's another big question that this book is answering, is where did we come from? And why is the world the way it is right now? And it's because of this civil war and these exiles who then proceeded to, you know, the Nephilim set up civilization after civilization spread around the world, appointing themselves as gods and rulers over us all. And at this point, you know, they've had 14,000 years to build up wealth and influence. There's no New World Order coming. It's been here for thousands of years. It's just management reorganizing itself again and again and again. Every time there's a big upheaval in the world, it's basically a couple of Nephilim at the round table group who couldn't agree on what to do.
Okay, so the Nephilim are the children of the Atlanteans who had babies with non-Atlanteans, is that right?
Right.
And they have been basically trying to control most things on Earth for a long time. Now, where does the Atlanteans and them leaving come in?
So 12,800 years ago is pretty well accepted now as the approximate date when a massive comet broke into a whole bunch of pieces and hit Earth. It's probably the most important day in human history, but we don't know when exactly it happened. You know, honestly, it would have made more sense to peg our calendars to, you know, after impact rather than, you know, after the death of Jesus Christ, which nobody really knows when it happened, because we've got the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar, and they can't really agree, and there's, you know, 3 missing years, and so, like, it's a great big mess. But there's probably over 100 published peer-reviewed studies now, bringing together geological information studies, you know, ice core samples. Basically every discipline you can think of that could weigh in on the subject has, and they're all pointing to the same time, saying, yeah, Earth was just pummeled brutally by comet fragments, and it set the world on fire. They figure over 50 million square kilometers of the Earth was burnt to ash, and then baked right into the soil strata. So you have this thing called the black mat, or the Younger Dryas boundary layer, and they're finding it everywhere. It's all over North America, all over Europe, all over parts of South America. They haven't even finished searching the world for the full extent of this, but it's undeniable that it's there, and it's filled with stuff called impact proxies. And so impact proxies are when you have a very high temperature, high pressure impact that could only be caused by something coming down from space and slamming into the Earth. It produces things that cannot be produced any other way. You also see elements that you don't normally see on Earth. They could have only come from space. Things like iridium. But you also find platinum in weird arrangements. You find nanodiamonds and microtubules and weird other arrangements of carbon that don't happen naturally. And so it's undeniable, I think, at this point that this happened. And
the Atlanteans were warning almost everyone on Earth about it, weren't they?
They were. And this is the reason why they took Enoch. They took Enoch to show him this and to explain to him, this is coming and it's going to destroy the world. And so we are here to basically complete a knowledge transfer, to give you knowledge that we want you to preserve for your children and their children and their children's children, in the hopes that you will survive.
Okay, and so they took off before the comet hit?
They might have, but there's this interim period between the impact 12,800 years ago and another one that happened 11,600 years ago. So the first impact, they relocated from the west coast of Africa to Egypt. And that relocation is very clearly spelled out in the Asclepius, which is another antediluvian story that has its roots in Egypt. And Hermes explains very, very matter-of-factly, yes, the gods who live in the westernmost reaches of Libya, which is Africa, by this great big mountain, which is Mount Atlas. Today we call it Tubkal. He says that they're going to relocate to Egypt. And I think this is probably why all the Egyptian temples all have celestial alignments, because Hermes even tells Asclepius that yes, Egypt is the image of heaven. Everything that is in heaven has been brought down and placed here in Egypt. Our home is the temple of the cosmos, as he calls it. So if the Atlanteans didn't build most of what you see in Egypt, they certainly laid the groundwork for it. But so they relocated to Egypt for a time, lasting about 1,200 years. But at the end of 1,200 years, another fragment of that comet that was whirling about in the solar system, which we still have a debris field called the Taurid meteor stream flying around, and occasionally they do come down. The Tunguska event was one. The Chelyabinsk meteor that went through Russia, that was another one, because both those events happened at the exact time the Earth was passing through the Taurid meteor stream. It happens in late summer, and then again in late fall, around November. I think July and November is Taurid meteor season. But at any rate, so they relocate. 1,200 years later, though, a giant piece of this asteroid streaks through the atmosphere, burns everything down from Mongolia westwards. It goes all the way across. It goes across Mongolia, across the Himalayas, over Persia, through Mesopotamia, through Arabia, burns all of North Africa to a crisp, including, Plan B for the Atlanteans, burns that to nothing, and then blows up somewhere over the Atlantic. And then that turns into just a hailstorm of fireballs raining down over the eastern seaboard of the United States. And if you look at cultures across the trail of that comet, they all have myths that describe exactly what they would have experienced. So there's an Indian tribe called the Mattamuskeet, which live on the eastern seaboard of America, and they have a legend where they hear this massive explosion over the ocean and then a big plume of steam coming up right before a hail of fireballs comes down and just pummels their entire lands. The Greeks have the whole story of Phaethon, and if you read the Timaeus and Critias, Plato says that this is not a myth. He says it's a real event. A celestial body fell from the sky, and that's where that story of Phaethon comes from. But you rewind it and you keep going east, and then the Sumerians have this story of Era in Ishum. And Era is just described as this fireball that blows down forests. And then you keep going east, and you get to the Chinese, and they have the myth of Kuafu. And Kuafu is a sky demon who chases after the sun. And because they're in China, they're in the east, it happened in the late afternoon for them. The Greeks describe it happening in the morning, which is correct. That's exactly what you would see based on their positions in the earth. And so they say this demon chased after the sun and drank up all of the rivers, meaning, you know, the heat from it passing by is just so much that it just flash evaporates all of the rivers. So we have all of these spectacular stories all coming together to describe this event that happened 11,006 years ago. And so at this point, the Atlanteans are like, all right, we're out. Because I think by then their technology had advanced to the point where they could leave the planet and go to another star system. Because the Phaethon is the event that brought about the Iron Age, according to the Greeks. And with the coming of the Iron Age, the Greeks also say the gods left Earth. So away they go.
Okay, so when you say they had the technology to leave the Earth, are you talking like rockets and stuff, or is like, I think you mentioned it's like anti-gravity? They like, don't go too like, not for 10 minutes on it, but like just briefly, what do you think they had, or what knowledge do they have?
Well, I mentioned that there are higher dimensions to this universe, and that's all that's what the part 2 of this book is about. And you know, you talk about this whole experience being a video game, and you're very right in a sense. It's just not running on a computer. It's running on some sort of in the mind of a divine entity that, you know, we can't even begin to comprehend. But it describes the material forces and material dimensions in terms of interactions between the higher dimensions. And so this is actually a cosmology that the Atlanteans communicated to Enoch. He didn't really understand it at the time, because you can kind of tell by the way he wrote it down that he didn't get it. He didn't get it. But with this book, I certainly got it when I read it, because once you read that, you understand the theoretical framework behind what the universe is, and what God is, and why we have free will, and how we can exist in the first place. And also how these kinds of technological feats can be achieved. Because matter, space, matter, this is all an illusion. We see it and we experience it because we're made of it. We can't see what is the underlying cause behind all of this, you know, stuff here that we can see and talk, and, you know, vibrations come out of my mouth and hit your ear, and you can detect that. And these are all very crude ways of my mind telling your mind what it's thinking. But that mind is a dimension in and of itself, where thoughts are forms, and it's possible to communicate through that dimension, which, if you could experience it, you would think it's telepathy. Likewise, time is an illusion. There's no real time. What's happening is we all exist in a giant wheel, for lack of a better word, which the Atlanteans called eternity. And eternity is everything. Everything that exists is on eternity. But eternity, you know, movement is an illusion, because space is an illusion. So eternity can't move, but it can spin. And so absolutely everything in the universe, if you study relativity, and there's a very quick lesson on relativity, in the book, which is actually not drawn from Einstein. It actually comes right out of the Asclepius from Hermes, which is at least 2,000 years old, just that manuscript. But it's based on stories the Atlanteans communicated to us 14,000 years ago. So they understood these concepts. And so, everything in the universe is moving at c, which we like to think of as the speed of light. But it's not. C is the rotational velocity of eternity. And we have a trade-off between temporal motion and spatial motion. And so light, something traveling at the speed of light, is all spatial motion and no temporal motion. And something that is absolutely still is all temporal motion and no spatial motion. And everything else is somewhere in between those two extremes. And so now you have a new kind of coordinate system. But it also explains where gravity comes from, because gravity is not a force carried by a particle, which CERN is looking for. Like, that's a complete dead end. That's not what gravity is. Gravity, again, is just another one of these illusions. But that has to do with variations in the flow of time. So when you're standing on the earth, time is flowing slower for your feet than for your head. And because of that, there's a shear force that's applied to you, which is pulling you towards the region of slower moving time. We call that gravity, but it's not really. But knowing that, if you can manipulate the flow of time, all of a sudden now you have propulsion. And that's why their ships are able to, UFOs, they're Atlanteans. Some of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
But
so
I can't tell you the whole thing yet.
Okay, so a lot of the Atlanteans left, but the Nephilim stayed here, and I think they had to stay here for some reason, right?
Yeah,
well, they were with Cronus. And
well, part of the sentence, so God, the king of Atlantis, extended that sentence to the Nephilim.
Because they were related to Cronus?
Yeah, well, and, he...
And they ate babies and stuff?
Yeah, they inherited... their cultural practices.
Okay.
Which
was like eating cannibalism and stuff.
Yeah, ritual child sacrifice, cannibalism, sex rituals, rape, all that kind of stuff.
So they stayed
nasty
here.
People.
They stayed here, and they've been trying to basically take over the whole world ever since, right?
Yeah, and they have a very special hatred for everybody who's not them.
Sounds like the Jews.
Well, not all of them, but you'll find the Nephilim's infiltration of all of our power structures and centers of influence, be it religious or government or corporate, is complete. We talk about a White Shoe Boy Club. Well, the people who run the White Shoe Boy Club, who sit on its board of directors, are Nephilim. The people running the government of, the people pulling the strings behind all of the governments of the world, those are also Nephilim. Now, it's important not to think of the Nephilim as a big monolithic organization either, because part of their condemnation is to basically just kill each other in endless wars. That's another thing that was in the Book of Enoch. Of course, they're still here. And, it also says that their spirits will defile mankind, leading us astray and to sacrificing to demons as gods, which is exactly what we're doing. We're all so many people are doing that. So many people are involved in cannibalism, knowingly or unknowingly, or pretend cannibalism, thinking, oh, look how hip or holy I am. And, so this is part of the undermining of humanity that they've been doing this whole time, because the Atlanteans showed a sympathy, I guess, towards other human beings on Earth, but not them. They hate us. But more than anybody, they hate the Atlanteans. And at the end of the first book, we get to, the book of Revelation and what that means and what all these end time prophecies are about. The Atlanteans are coming back. Now,
didn't I hear that the Nephilim created all the world's religions? And is that to kind of like keep people kind of confused?
Absolutely. If you look at all ancient societies, the king was a god. So religion and state were not separate things. Over time, they became separated. And particularly, with the advent of World War I, we have to make the world safe for democracy. This was a massive change in policy. We were no longer going to have rule by divine right. We were going to have this, rule by the people, which is just probably one of their biggest, most successful hoaxes.
Democracy.
Yeah, democracy. You have no real choice because everybody you get to vote for has already been vetted and handpicked by these people. That's why they always go back on their promises, because they're not there to help you. They're there to help the people they work for. But so all of these religions were started as a way of preventing slave revolts. Because again, if you go back to the Sumerian texts, the very first problem they had with people was they revolted. The Anunnaki arrive, and there are other gods who did the work of tilling the fields and making bread and feeding this ruling class of Anunnaki. They were called the Ajiji. The Ajiji eventually revolt, and so that they learned their lesson in one go. You can't have your slaves revolt. So a new slave class, i.e., us human beings, which were just humans from the hunter-gatherer tribes that existed around them, they enslaved those people, fed them a religion. We created you and we're gods. Look at all the wonderful things we can do, and enslaved them with a belief system. And so, how can you rebel against a god? So that was a great mechanism control. It worked for over 10,000 years. But by the time of World War I, that had to be changed, because people, especially 19th century people, really weren't jiving so well with the major religions. You had this massive upswell of occult society and interest in the occult and interest in Atlantis. And like, what is this? And so very quickly, they had to nip that in the bud, because they didn't want people asking too many questions about Atlantis and go and look in them, because they knew they would eventually find it. So take over all the secret societies, just like the religions. Take over, just like they've taken over everything. Every time some emerging potential threat to their influence and rule comes out, they send in their infiltrators. And they infiltrated Christianity from the very beginning. Just read the Epistle of Jude. It's the second to last book in the Bible. It's only 3 or 4 pages long. It tells you point blank the Nephilim are infiltrating the church. Watch out, guys. And it also talks about the synagogue of Satan. Who the hell could that be? Who's doing all of these nasty things. And so everywhere you look...
Are a lot of the Nephilim Jews?
I don't think so. I think probably most Jews are not descendants of Nephilim.
Okay.
From the genetic studies...
behind Judaism?
Oh, they definitely do.
They hide behind
right? They hide behind everything. But the thing is that they seem like they're tired of that arrangement. They want to reemerge, which is why you see a lot. I think you see a lot of their original dogmas reemerging, and they're flooding alternative media with so many psyops. It's insane, and so they want to sort of reemerge as gods, or at least very powerful people who are going to save us from the Atlanteans.
Who are coming back soon, apparently, right?
Yes.
But the Atlanteans are good, right?
They are. They don't eat people. They don't murder babies. They as far as I know,
And so the Nephilim are worried they're going to come back.
And because that's when their time is up. Like, they were given time to reform, and boy, did they not.
It seems like they're trying to kill everyone before the Atlanteans get back.
Well, they want to have very tight control over the Earth again, and that means, you know, massive deaths, because of course more people means a higher likelihood of a slave revolt. And it always comes down to, are the slaves about to revolt? Are they about to revolt? I mean, it's why Spartan society was so militaristic, because at the very beginning of Sparta's civilization, I suppose, they invaded a neighboring society called the Helots and enslaved all of them. The thing was that the Helots outnumbered the Spartans 5-1. And so the Spartans were so paranoid of a slave revolt that every Spartan male had to be able to kill at least 5 Helots all by themselves. And that's why they were so trained, carried such heavy armor, because, you know, as soon as a slave got uppity, it was that. And so they were always, that was the number one worry in Spartan society. And even they were ruled over by a weird priesthood called the Ephors. But wherever you look, you know, in all these great big societies that the Nephilim set up, particularly from Canaan through Mesopotamia and then into Khazaria, like the area where you find Ukraine and Kazakhstan. You know, you find these civilizations, the Canaanites, which were the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians. You find, you know, the Babylonians, the Akkadians. You keep going, you find the Thracians, the Scythians. And all these societies all had a priesthood. Their high priests were trannies. They were all trannies. Their most holy people, the highest reverence, were trannies that conducted gay orgies in honor of their goddess. And she was known by all sorts of names. Again, you know, so many names for the same thing over time. The Greeks knew her as Aphrodite. The Romans called her Venus. The Scythians called her Artimpasa. The Phoenicians called her Astarte. The Carthaginians called her Tanit. But it's all the same goddess of, you know, sexuality. She's like the holy hoe.
Interesting. So, oh man. So, like in the book, it says the Atlanteans might come back in 2028, and I see all this alien stuff going on. And so it appears like the Nephilim are trying to get ready for if they come back. And then you get the whole Project Bluebeam, or is it Bluebeam?
Yeah, Bluebeam, the fake alien invasion.
Yeah, so this could all be happening in the next few years. So I think it's interesting that this book talks about all this stuff. It all seems to be happening. Like everything's turning like LGBTQ tranny stuff now, very satanic. Cannibalism's like all over all the media now, like all the movies and stuff. We're starting to find out in McDonald's meat, there's like human meat.
Someone got pushed into the grinder.
Yeah.
They're like, just let it run, no one will notice.
And this is all Nephilim stuff. So to me, it's all tying a lot of things together. And there's one thing I should bring up, and that is, you talk about how the Atlanteans actually left this Earth and they went to a different star system. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people watching right now. They're about to turn it off, right? It's like, oh, these guys are crazy. They don't know the Earth's flat and there isn't space, right? I'll say this much. I don't know anything about anything. like we're in basically a 3D video game that's so unbelievable that like anything could be true. I do know that everything I've heard about them going to the moon looks completely faked. Like it's so fake that it's unbelievably, like I can't believe anyone believes it. I know NASA lies about so much stuff, but I don't know. I don't know if there is space or not. I don't know if the Earth's flat or not. I don't know. I've never seen it. I think if you can go up high enough, you could probably tell. And that's maybe something I'll do. I also want to see if I can go past the poles at some point, because, you know, even Admiral Byrd said it's actually a hollow Earth that you can go through. So anyway.
That was a fake book.
Oh, was it?
He didn't actually. It wasn't written by him.
Maybe it's good you told me because we're just about to go and try to find it. But anyway, I'm trying to figure out all this stuff, right? But I just wanted to let people know, if they're more flat earthers, that if you hear about this space travel stuff, not to just immediately turn off your brain. And I was telling you about that, and you had some interesting thoughts on flat Earth.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, look into the history of that idea and where it came from. The modern flat Earth movement got started in the 1800s by a guy named Samuel Robotham. And this guy, if you look at him, he was a complete kook. He was a very devoutly religious Christian, but he was also a hardcore communist. He was a member of the New Haven Commune. He was a big follower of a guy named Robert Owen, who was, the rich guy who was paying for all of these communes. And he was actually a literal snake oil salesman. Before he got a job doing the finances for one of Robert Owen's communes, where he was eventually booted out because he was taking all their money. But before that, he was literally selling snake oil. He was a medicine salesperson.
Dr. Fraudzy.
Yeah. He's 45 years old, marries like a girl who was like 14, I think, has 15 children with her, winds up killing 11 of them. And so, like, this is
Sounds
a guy.
like a Nephilim.
Yeah, this is a guy who's chasing get-rich schemes his whole life, and just getting involved with the shadiest, most screwed-up ideas ever, like socialist commune. Like, sure, it was the first, but if you knew anything about it, it was a bad idea.
I've looked into like flat Earth stuff for years. So I find it fascinating. I've never even heard of that guy. So. But you actually think, or in this book, or I don't even know because I'm not done the book yet, that the Nephilim actually started the flat Earth idea because they don't want people to know about.
Yes. So, I mean, Sam, being the devout biblical Christian guy that he was, he wanted everything in the Bible to the letter being literally true. So he reads Genesis and says, oh, well, this is how it describes the earth. There's the waters below, there's the flat earth on top of it, the dome, and then the waters above. And he's like, okay, now let's go set about proving that, which is actually the reverse of science. Science is, look at all of these observations we made, and let's come up with something that can explain it. We don't start with the conclusion and then try to prove it. But anyways, he couldn't know where the genesis story of this cosmological model, he couldn't have known where it came from, because I don't think the Sumerian tablets had been discovered yet. But when you read the Sumerian tablets, or even the Babylonian tablets, the idea for how the earth is shaped and how it's constructed, with the four layers, that is not an original idea. That is exactly lifted whole cloth out of ancient Sumerian or Babylonian religion, because they had exactly the same system. They had the underworld, which they called Urkala or Kur. The Jews called it Sheol. Then you had a freshwater, an underground freshwater lake, which was the waters below, or the Apsu, which is what they called it. And then you had the flat land covered by a dome, and then you had the celestial realm, or the waters above, where God was. And so when so being that this is part of what the average person in Babylon or Sumeria was being told was true according to their religion, now their astronomy was totally different. Like, they were tracking the orbit of Venus, the orbit of of Mars and Jupiter. Like, they knew about planets. They knew that their model that they were teaching everyone was not true. But nevertheless, they taught them this because it creates a certain kind of mindset that, oh, well, this is all there is, and I don't need to think about a larger infinite universe, because that's just, that's just not a thing. My gods are over here. I live on this flat earth. They can go out to the other side of the dome. I can't because I'm immortal. And it helped them to create the hierarchical society where we're gods, you're mortals, we're special, you're not. Here's your story. This is the truth. And don't question it. And so, if somebody is truly open-minded, if they hear something that they don't know, they're not going to recoil in horror and instinctually try and, just start shouting out what they know at the other person. That's what a religious person would do. So, if you are into the flat earth thing, you try to examine how the idea of an infinite universe and around Earth, why do you feel the way you do about that idea? Don't necessarily worry about proving one model or the other model. Examine how it's making you feel and whose agenda that might serve.
Interesting stuff. I think we should leave it there. The sun's going down. But there's so much we didn't talk about that's in here. I haven't even read the last part yet, which actually it alludes to a lot, and it sounds like something I'm going to be totally into. It's like, well, maybe you could just, like in a minute or two, just kind of like gloss over what the last parts are about.
It sounds like the whole book?
Well, I kind of got the sense that, later in the book, it's going to talk about how you can
get ready.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's the last part of the book. It's called The Path of Righteousness.
Yeah.
And this is a summary of a lot of Atlantean teachings about basically how to live a happy life.
Yeah,
what do you do? What is the meaning of life? What do you have time here. What should you be doing with it? Should you be, chasing money and girls, or should you be trying to discover your own true divine nature and cultivate that connection with God that you have? Because there's a quote from Hermes in there, and he says, why do you, abase yourself and, say, I'm not worthy and I cannot ascend to mount to heaven. I know not what I am or where I am or what to do. If you're saying that, what do you have to do with a God? So it's like is known by like. So in order to really know God, the Atlantean teaching is, become godly and you will know God, because God is in here.
Which is kind of what I believe. So that everything in this resonates with me a ton. So I'm only like halfway through. I'm looking forward to. I actually been reading on my Kindle. I brought the hard copy because I got my hyperbaric chamber here. So I want to every day for an hour go in and read the book while I'm in the hyperbaric chamber. While I'm trying to make everything perfect physically, mentally, spiritually. That's basically what I've been working on. So is there anything?
It's working for you. I can see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling amazing. You feel so good when you do this stuff too. Why not do it? And is there anything that you wanted to mention that we haven't gotten to yet, or didn't talk about before we finish up?
Yeah, check out the book. Clear your mind before reading it. I guarantee you,
it's an easy read, by the way. Every chapter's 2-3 pages. If you're I don't want to read a heavy book, this is a super easy read.
Yeah, well, and even the long chapters are broken down into pretty digestible sections too.
The information's deep, but it's 2 pages per chapter sort of a thing. So you can kind of read a couple chapters.
Yeah, you can pick it up, put it down a lot.
Yeah.
But clear your mind, because if you read the introduction, you're warned in advance that you're going to be challenged. And I think there's a challenge in here, at least one big challenge in here for everyone. Yeah,
and it's, of all the things I've heard about what life is, this one is pretty up there with the Upanishads as something that I'm well, this seems a lot closer than anything else I've heard about. I've all these religions and stuff. I'm like, I don't know about this. I don't know about that. That seems a little too contrived for me. The Upanishads, I don't know how many books are in it, but I read one, I think it's called the Upanishads. I don't know if it's maybe a bunch of books. But every page I was like, whoa, this like super connects with me.
There's different
and this was like
compilations
connecting
of
with
them.
me mentally, like, oh, if that's true, then, oh, that makes sense. If that's what that was, they weren't actually gods, but they wanted people to think they were gods. And, and then all this alien stuff going on now. It's like, oh, and so the Atlanteans might be coming back now, and now these guys want to like fool everybody about it. Like,
it's the ultimate false flag attack.
yeah, so it's wild. Like,
They're going to false flag the gods.
yeah, so I know in the comments, which I'm not going to read, there's going to be so many people like, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. I don't know anything. I'm just telling you this book's interesting. Check it out for yourself if you want to, based on what we talked about. We'll put the link to Amazon down below. I get nothing from this. You're not giving me any kickbacks off all the big sales you're going to do. But you will be at Anarchapulco with a bunch of copies you can sign for people if they want to get them.
I'm being shipped 30 autographed copies, so I'll have those for sale at Anarchapulco.
Oh, Yajnavelka has autographed them?
Yeah, he's still in touch. He likes to see how things are going.
Very cool. It's definitely interesting. If you're looking for something interesting to like get you to think completely differently about everything you've ever thought before, this is definitely one of them. And there's so much actual like factual and stuff you can look into yourself in this book.
It's heavily footnoted.
Yeah, it's very
hundreds and
very
hundreds of footnotes, and not to like wacky sources either, like scientific journals and articles from mostly mainstream publications.
Yeah, and there's like all DNA stuff tracking like
DNA studies,
from the
yeah.
Nephilims. So I guess to finalize, I don't know if this is going to get us killed or not, but I guess if this DNA stuff, we could actually find out who all the Nephilim people are just by doing a DNA test on them.
100%.
Okay,
but I mean, you won't. That's not proof that they're evil.
Oh, are not all Nephilim evil?
I don't think so. I think probably some of them have reformed, and because that's kind of what.
It's not like a hereditary thing.
No. I mean,
It's more like a family tradition.
It's a family tradition that is the problem. It's not their genes.
Okay, very interesting. Well, I'll leave it there. Where's Lucy? Lucy. Should finish up with Lucy. Oh, did she go inside? Yeah, she got.
She's over by the pool.
Oh, Lucy, Ben. Lucy, we can't finish with that yet. Lucy, Ben.
Taco time.
Oh, it's about time. You guys have been talking for quite a while over here. I've just been sitting by the pool here in Acapulco, Mexico. It's pretty nice, but I could sure use some tacos. And I'll give everyone kisses, including you.
Try some Atlantean tacos.
Oh, Atlantean tacos. That sounds pretty good.
I wonder if they have those.